Hello, my name is Father Timothy Tighe, and this is our 140th segment of our journey of faith in the light of the cross, and we thank you for joining us. And we go to our screen to see our theme. As Levites helped Israelites to manage their wrath, to cultivate life and peace in the community, some other Levites poured toxic rage on ethnics and the collaborators who ruled Israel. Church history in this context was hard to explain for Luke, but Luke got the essentials, and that's what we want to get at today if we can. We go to our next screen and we see, in segment 139, our last segment, we saw how God and Moses transformed the Levites into peacemakers who helped the Israelites, mostly Judeans, to manage their wrath. Okay, this was a wondrous transformation. But at the same time, shame filled Israel with wrath as they looked back to the successful Maccabean, and the Maccabees were also called the Hasmonean family, revolt in 162 BC. They should also assert themselves. A lot of them were ashamed that they weren't fighting back at their rulers. The priestly Maccabees poured out toxic rage on the Hellenizers of an exhausted Greek empire in 162. The Hellenizers are those who love the Greek culture. They were blessed with success for killing ethnics and their Hellenized Israeli collaborators, so they were hated as much as the Greeks. We go on to the next screen. This success of the Maccabees led to the book of Jubilee after that, about 150, a non-biblical book which reads that Jacob was wrong to disentitle Levi for having blessed Levi for killing Shechem's men. This was in chapter 30, verse 23. You remember we emphasized that Jacob eliminated Levi from the firstborn inheritance because he was so vicious. In the Testament of the 12 Patriarchs, another non-biblical book, these books were not in the Bible, but they contradicted the Bible, that Levi had a higher calling than Judah. The book of 12 Patriarchs has Judah himself, so to get down the list, Levi speaks and then Judah speaks. Judah himself testified that God said to him, "Love Levi, Judah, that you not be destroyed. The Lord gave me," says Judah, "monarchy, but he placed monarchy under priests. He gave me what is on earth, but to Levi he gave what is of heaven." Now the Judeans just did not like this, but we'll deal with that another time. We go on to our next screen. This attitude of many of the Levites led to an unsuccessful rebellion against Pompey 100 years later in 63 BC. We covered this. 10,000 Levites were deported, and that's where we get the Freedmen's Synagogue, the men who went against St. Stephen. Remember that all these references are in Luke. Leaving thousands of abandoned women, widows, and orphans. Now, this is one of our great themes. Every time these guys rebelled, they left an awful lot of abandoned women, widows, and orphans. After Jesus' birth in Bethlehem at Herod's death in 4 BC, so we know the Holy Family went down to Alexandria in Egypt, Romans put down a revolt in Sepphoris, which is 4 miles from Nazareth, so it's almost the same city, killing and enslaving thousands, leveling Sepphoris, abandoning thousands of women and orphans. So this is why the Holy Family is away, maybe why they didn't go back to Nazareth. In effect, the Holy Family shared deportation in Egypt. So there were aliens in Egypt. We go on to our next screen. 10 years later, after Joseph and the family returned, Judas the Galilean captured the weapons of the Sepphoris arsenal. Sepphoris, as you remember, was being rebuilt by Herod Antipas, and it was providing work for Joseph and provided the way for the return of the Holy Family. Judas and the Zealots terrorized Galilee with the weapons they had taken from the arsenal till Romans crucified 2,000 Zealots in 6 AD. 2,000 were crucified, again enslaving many and abandoning women and orphans. Judas seems to have escaped capture again. So the mystery, they've been trying to figure out why he never gets killed. So they think he was in the first revolt, then he was in the second revolt, and then they think he might have appeared 40 years later. But he left all his men get killed. Now, recall that Sepphoris is 4 miles from Nazareth, so Jesus was about 10 when the second revolt took place. He must have been very aware of the suffering that these zealots caused in his neighbors. We go on to the next screen. Judas the Galilean escaped capture and later reappearing. We keep repeating that. Now, we go to 27 AD. Pilate ordered Tiberius' image on the temple, the same year as Jesus began his public life. But 10,000 Israelites knelt and bared their necks for the Roman sword. So Pilate backed off. So these people rebelled against it. Don't you dare put it on there. And Pilate threatened them. They just bared their necks and said, you'll have to kill us. And he said, these people are crazy. And he backed off. And they thought this was wonderful. Now, in 27 AD, Jesus began pastoring the victims of Judas and the zealots and the toxic rage, even Gentile victims. So we notice how Jesus reached out to so many people and gathered the poor crowds that seemed overwhelmed. Many of them were victims of these rebellions. In 32, Stephen preached the cross to redeem the toxic rage of his fellow Levites in Jerusalem from the freedmen's synagogue. But he was also rejected with more toxic rage, so their toxic rage put him to death. They stoned him viciously. We go on to the next screen. Caligula ordered his own image on the temple in 40 AD. We also have covered that. Though assassinated Caligula, he provoked more toxic rage, which led to Judas's, the Galilean son, Jacob, and Simon being killed in a rebellion under Theudas in 46, a few years later. Luke has Gamaliel talk about this in Acts 5:35. That's why we're mentioning it, because it's right there under Gamaliel's speech. Gamaliel saw his own son filling with toxic rage, and his son did help lead the Jerusalem revolt in 66 AD. So 25 to 30 years before it happened, Gamaliel saw what was affecting his son, and he was praying that even maybe the cross could detox him. The 136 years from Pompey, 63 BC, to Masada in 73 AD were years of constant defeat, leaving many dead, wounded, enslaved, abandoned, and orphaned. We go on to our next screen. Luke and Josephus, writing in about 85, looked back and saw this history in retrospect. Josephus blamed Judas the Galilean for spreading his toxic rage till it infected all of Jerusalem and caused the rebellion, eventually causing the temple rebellion in 66 AD. Judas's grandson, Manahem, was one of the revolt leaders, and his nephew Eleazar escaped to Masada and led Masada to suicide in 73 AD. So this just kept going in one generation after another. Now we go on to the next screen, and we read, Luke had few dependable sources to explain a very difficult historical context. But with God's grace, Luke gives us enough clues to understand the eternal battle. Who would win out? The church and the eternal life-giving love of the God of Jesus Christ who redeems wrath and toxic rage, or the claim that the toxic rage of shame is not only a gift from God, but wins God's blessings of eternal life. These men were pouring out their toxic rage, claiming it was a gift from God and they would be rewarded for doing it. They were the terrorists. They were terrible. Now we go on to our next screen. As the Levites helped Israelites to manage wrath, to cultivate life and peace, other Levites poured out toxic rage on ethnics and the collaborators who ruled Israel. Church history in this context was hard to explain, but Luke got the essentials. And he wanted the essentials because he's preparing for the Council of Jerusalem in 49, when the church was trying to make very important decisions, but in a terrible context, a frightening context, and yet the church, with God's grace, won out. We thank you so much for joining us for this 140th segment of our Journey of Faith in the Light of the Cross. I know it's difficult, but the impression is more important than getting all the facts. So thank you so much.